And thank you, everyone, for whatever reason choosing to spend your evening this way. Um, so, what I wrote in the sort of description for this is that this is literally my favorite talk. Um, it's one of those topics that is so important for us as practitioners and as humans, but very rarely gets addressed. And it's a lot of um, there are a lot of things that I'm going to talk about that we basically have to deal with on a daily basis, but no one really shows us a good way to do it. Before I jump in, I want you to do a bit of work. So this is going to be a bit of an interactive session or an active session, and to get the most out of it, when we get to the part where I talk about a framework for giving feedback, I really want each and every one of you to sort of use a past experience to help you practice some of those principles. So if you can, grab a piece of paper, or you can use your computer and write down, or if you can't do either of those, just think really hard about this. But think about a time when someone at work made you feel angry, upset, insignificant, misunderstood. And I really want you to think about all the details. What did they say? How did they make you feel? How did you react to what they said? What do you wish you would have done differently? Think about all those things. You don't have to write everything down, but really try to make that memory vivid. Um, I'm really curious, just as a sort of a show of hand, if you can just raise your hand for a second. Uh, has this ever happened to you, though? Like, I don't know, I'm making assumptions here that you've had this kind of thing. So just raise your hand, use the, raise hand function. And I'm just curious to see if any of you ever ran into this situation. Okay, I see some hands. I see quite a few hands. So I'm not, you know, my assumption was fair. Awesome. You can lower your hands now. And like I said, we're gonna come back to this later on in this talk. So as Christina said, I've been in the tech world for quite a while. I started as a software developer, and after about a decade of doing that, I discovered UX and design and was very lucky to make that move over. Um, I mentor on ADP List. And in addition to that, I currently lead the design system team at Thomson Reuters, where we build the one design system to rule them all that's going to support Thomson Reuters' 150 different products. A big part of that work is, of course, working with other people. And that's when interesting things happen. And why is that? Well, when we look at ourselves, we know what our own thoughts, experiences, emotions, desires, expectations are. Like we know what we're thinking. But when we interact with another person, when we enter this kind of, a relationship, whether it's a romantic or just a work relationship or friendship or any sort of interaction with a different person, whether it's a colleague, a boss, a friend, a partner, things change. I'm an introverted extrovert, meaning that working with people is the most exciting part of my job, but also one that can really drain my energy. Or as someone else put it very, very aptly, people are so much work. So why is that? That's because every time we interact with someone else, we tend to skip a very important step or hope that it will happen on its own. And that step is setting expectations. So instead of that, we guess what those expectations are. We not only become mind readers, but we expect others to become mind readers as well and read our mind. And what happens when their actions clash with what we expect? We get negative emotions. Oh, that person is not interested in collaborating, we might say, or that person is such a jerk, or, even stronger words. We ascribe a meaning to their actions based on our assumptions. And those meanings are what stays with us and cause those negative emotions. It's not that the actions are necessarily bad. It's the meaning that we attribute to them that is the bad thing. So this is kind of like setting the intro to this talk. And I'm going to talk about, um, first, I'm going to start about the root cause behind conflicts. Then I'm going to share a few tips about how to address existing conflicts that are already happening to you with other people. I'm going to go into how to prevent future conflicts. And I'm going to end with a deep dive into one of the best tools out there for resolving conflict with another person, and that's the feedback. Now, since this talk used to be a 2-hour workshop, all in person, I'm going to go a bit quicker through sections 2 and 3 because I really want to get to the meat of this session with giving feedback. But don't worry, I'm assuming that, first of all, you can always go back and revisit the talk on YouTube, but hopefully Christina will be able to make the slides available and share with you. So let's start with understanding why conflicts happen. What makes that other person difficult? There could be a lot of different reasons why that other person is quote unquote difficult. They have their own worries and concerns. They might be under pressure from their own manager, or it might be something that we're completely unaware of. We just don't know. The key to remember is that it shouldn't be a battle. It's not you versus them. Because at the root of it, the thing that everyone wants most is to feel that they matter and that they're heard. And if you sort of retain one thing from this part of of my talk, is that everyone wants this. Everyone wants to feel understood. Everyone wants to feel that they matter and what they have to say matters. And by understanding what it is that they need and making that space for them, we can then we can make them feel that they matter and that they're heard. So this is kind of like really talking about the root cause of those conflicts. Let's go now into different approaches in resolving a conflict. So there's going to be about 5 different slides here, and each one talks about a different aspect, or slightly different aspect of how you can work on that conflict to resolve it. So first of all, you need to keep yourself open. You need to be open to receive what they have to say. And this is where really practicing empathy comes into play. Active listening is an important skill that isn't used enough because we're usually busy waiting for the other person to stop talking so we can say what we really want to say. But in order to give the other person space, we need to be able to receive. And you need to make sure that you're not either knowingly or unknowingly closing yourself up to our resolution. Your attitude should be focused on finding a solution and strengthening the relationship with that person. I'm a very bad mind reader. I'm terrible at it. In fact, very few people are good at mind reading. And I assume most of you aren't great at it either. The best way to know how the other person thinks and sees things is to ask them. And another really great way of resolving that conflict is taking that person and sort of isolating them and talking to them one-on-one. There are 2 reasons why it's better to talk to them in private. First, they don't feel the need to perform in front of others. So if let's say you're talking to someone who's a manager of a team and the other people on that team are with them in the room, they might feel they need to sort of represent the team and close themselves up to a resolution. It also means that if you isolate them, if you talk to them one-on-one, their negative opinions, whatever those may be, won't affect others, won't sort of like infect others with those negative opinions. So this is really powerful. I'll give you an example. I was leading a a design project, and the I had a lot of friction with the front end lead engineer, and he really said no to everything we wanted to do. And I got to a point where we just couldn't do anything because he just said no to everything. So I said, okay, let's go for coffee. And he went for coffee, and I just let him talk and sort of express everything that was bugging him. And a lot of it had nothing to do with the design team. He just felt like he doesn't have a voice, and what he says doesn't, like, his intentions don't really matter. And by letting him just sort of, it was kind of like a therapy session, but he was able to get over it, and we ended up having a great working relationship as a result. I've personally found that the best tool to resolve conflict is to give feedback. This allows you to share what isn't working for you in a very calm, structured way, and it doesn't cause the other person to become defensive. I'll get back to it in a few minutes. So, how do you prevent future conflicts? Well, there's no 100% foolproof guarantee that things will never go sour. And in fact, any unchecked relationship will inevitably need some maintenance as you go. That's always the case. But here are some tips to sort of preemptively put your best foot forward when you start working with someone new. As designers, and I'm going to generalize now, we tend to focus our work on the user, the person who's going to be using the product or service that we're creating. We have a lot of empathy for them. But sometimes we forget to apply that same empathy towards all the other people between us and the user. And in order to avoid friction, we should use the same methods that we use within our design. You already saw some of those things come up when I was talking about how you resolve existing conflicts, right? You listen, actively listen to what the other person needs. You keep yourself open to different options. All those things that we already do as designers and as researchers, it all applies here. So when you start working with a new stakeholder or teammate, for example, interview them. It doesn't need to be a formal interview. It can be a casual coffee chat. But what you're trying to do is understand what their perspective is, what they're looking to get out of the project. And a question I love to ask when I start you know, a relationship with a new stakeholder is, what's keeping you up at night? What's the one thing that you just is bugging you? And if I know that, then I know what they'll be focused on. I know what they will be expecting. So that already helps me understand better what those expectations are. A really important thing to do is keep them in the loop. Remember that people want to feel heard. That's like root cause of a lot of those issues. That's how you continuously do that. You keep them in the loop. You keep them engaged. They want to feel heard. Make sure they're involved. And when you notice a behavior you want to reinforce, you want to see keep happening, praise them for it. The feedback framework I'm going to teach in a few minutes covers both positive feedback as well as constructive feedback. And be very loud and raise any red flags you have early as possible. This is pure UX process. You measure and you course correct if you need to. So now that we talked about resolving conflicts, preventing future conflicts, we're getting to the meat of the presentation. This is going to be a very simple framework for giving someone else feedback about their behavior. I did not invent this framework. You can find a lot of different variations of it in books, but this specific phrasing is the one that I've been using and teaching others how to use multiple times before. Um, Before we get there, I'd love to hear some raise your hand if you want to speak, but I'd love to hear some voices. So I'm going to hear from a few people. Um, do you enjoy receiving feedback on your performance? I'm very curious to know. Uh, um, yeah, just that you can just turn on your mic and say yes or no.
Um, and my Yes. feeling is that if I do good work, definitely like receiving feedback. And this is for a professional setting. If I do good work, I guess it stems from me playing football. So every week after a game, you're gonna get feedback whether you like it or not. So at least I can focus on. You could be like relationships. I mean, criticism never hurts, especially if it's a bad job. But I think it feels good to know. Like, really great to be around. You know, because if you think you're doing right, but you're actually doing wrong, that's going to hurt you too. Like so it's good to have somebody kind of say, "Hey, you're doing a good job. Here's some of the things that you can work on and get a little bit better on." So I never mind feedback, especially when it's coming from people that you know have your interests of some sort, whether it be work or home or personal life. So sorry for the long answer, but
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm hearing two voices at the same time.
I've had to do some. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in the office. I'm sorry. Sorry.
No worries. Thank you, Douglas.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll just say, okay, sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd love to hear if you can put into chat, just say yes, no, or thumbs up, thumbs down, if you like receiving performance feedback. Thank you, Sam. Depends. Yeah, that's a usual design answer. Awesome. This is great. So I see a lot of yeses. So now, again, in the chat, put yes or no. Do you enjoy giving another person feedback on their performance? Interesting. I see more no's this time. And of course, there's always depends. Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for interacting with that. So usually the reason we don't like giving performance feedback is because we didn't always have the best experience receiving performance feedback. Because a lot of times when we think about giving another person feedback, this is what comes to mind. I know for myself, one of my first jobs as a UX designer, I asked my boss, well, hey, how am I doing? And my boss said to me, a very confusing piece of feedback that I'm a great interaction designer, but I'm a terrible information architect. I still have no idea what she meant by that and or what to do with it. But I did not enjoy being told that. I didn't even know how to handle it, what to do with it. We've been given feedback in a terrible way a lot of times, and we got hurt, we got humiliated sometimes. In fact, it's been the word feedback induces so much fear that this article came out late 2000, late last year, about the word feedback itself is so harsh that instead some places are using the word feed forward, which is ridiculous. So what do we do when we need to give another person feedback for performance review, for example, or let's say they've been late every day and we need to course correct? What do we do? Well, a lot of times people use a method that I'll refer to nicely as the poop sandwich. You start with a compliment, then you unload all the terrible things, and then you finish up with another compliment. That's a really bad way to give feedback. When you hear the compliments, you really know what's coming next, and you're bracing yourself for all the negative stuff that's coming. And the compliment at the end is more of an insult at that point. So I say no to the poop sandwich. The reason why a lot of times feedback misses the point is because it's about the past. So think about these questions. And again, I'll ask you to, in the chat, put yes or no. In the past month, have you made any mistakes? Yes or no, put it in chat. Wow, everyone. Okay, oh, some people have not made any mistakes in the past month. That's incredible. If you're like the rest of us, you'll probably admit that, if I'm being honest, yes, I've made, a mistake, more of them. I constantly make mistakes. And now, again, in the chat, put yes or no. Did you intend to make those mistakes? Did you set up to mess things up on purpose? And again, if you're like the rest of us, you'll probably, say right away, no, of course I didn't. Thank you for interacting. But the problem is that you can't change what happened in the past. The moment you switch to focus on the future, that's when you free yourself up to focus on something that you or the person you're giving feedback to can do something about. This is a definition of what we're talking about now. The purpose of performance communications, which is feedback is part of, is to encourage effective future behavior, meaning based on something that happened in the past, you want to ensure one of two things. You want to encourage one of two things. Either you want that behavior to continue, meaning you're giving positive feedback. Hey, what you did was good, do more. Or on the other hand, you didn't like what happened. You want it to change. You want something different to happen in the future. So you say, hey, don't do that. You want to encourage effective future behavior, whether that is, you always want it to be something that's effective, whether it's continuation of something good or a change if something bad happened. So here's that simple framework for giving feedback that really encourages effective future behavior. You can apply it to anyone, anywhere. I know we're talking about, design setting here, but you can also apply it to, at home with your family, with your friends, with your partners. It works with everyone. It really eliminates that accusation aspect of feedback, like feeling like, oh, you did something bad. And it does it in 4 very easy steps. So if you're ready, this is the active part of the workshop. Remember in the beginning, I asked you to think about that a time when someone made you feel angry, upset, insignificant, or misunderstood. Think about that time. And we're going to use the framework I'm going to talk about to sort of write down the feedback you could have given that person. So let's dive into it. The first step is asking for permission. And I know it sounds very basic, but you really want to get their permission to before you give them the feedback. And that's because you really want them to be in the right mindset to receive that feedback. You have no idea. Maybe you really want to give someone feedback, but right now they're too upset, or they're in a hurry. They're running into a different meeting. They're not in the right mindset to receive that feedback. If they say no, back off and try again later. That's really important. You're asking for permission. If they say no, try again later. Respect that. So the first step is always, hey, can I give you some feedback? That's the first step. Very simple so far. The second step is stating a behavior. And it usually starts with the words when you. For example, when you come prepared to the client meeting, or when you came in late every day of this week. Like I said, this framework is also good outside of work. Like, for example, let's say you're at home and your roommates did not wash the dishes and left them in the sink dirty, even though it was their turn to wash the dishes. You can say, when you leave dirty dishes in the sink. This step is really important because it only deals with behavior you can observe. It's not about the way we interpret. If you go back to the beginning when I talked about you had certain assumptions and expectations, the other person behaved in a way that didn't meet those expectations. We're not talking about that story. We're not talking about, your roommate didn't wash the dishes. The story we made in our head, or the interpretation we made in our head, is that they don't care about this, or they think I'm their servant, I'm going to do it for them. No, we're only focusing on what happened, what the observable behavior was. The only thing we saw was they didn't do the dishes. When we talk about that specific behavior thing, the words they say, how you say those words, their facial expression, body language, something they produced at work. It's never about an attitude or motivation. For example, a really bad way for a boss to give feedback to their one of their reports is, hey, you were really disengaged in a meeting. Why did they say that? Maybe the person was on their phone. The only thing they saw was a person was on their phone. Who knows why the person was on their phone? But they made an assumption and ascribed a meaning to it. You're disengaged. You don't care about the project. But if you say the feedback of the interpretation, hey, you really don't care about this project, the other person may not even know what you're talking about. What do you mean? I'm super engaged in this project. But the only thing that a person saw was on their phone. So instead you say, hey, can I give you some feedback? Step 1, ask for permission. Step 2, when you're on your phone in a meeting. That's an observable behavior, and that's something you can't really argue with, because you're not arguing with the interpretation. You're just listening to, okay, something happened. So that's step 2. You state the behavior, the observable behavior. So think about that incident in your past, and that person did something or said something. This is when you say, like, after you wrote step 1, hey, can I give you some feedback? Step 2, when you said X, or when you did this. Step 3. Step 3 is awesome. And this is where you state the impact of their behavior. This is the follow-up to the behavior, right? They did something, and that behavior had an impact either on you or someone else. I'll give you a few examples. When you come prepared to the client meeting, that is the observable behavior. That's step 2. Step 3, you make the team look good. That's the impact. Or when you came in late every day of this week, that's step 2, the observable behavior. The person came in late. That's something that happened. What is the impact? Step 3, the team thinks you don't care about them. Or again, going back to the dirty dishes, when you leave dirty dishes in the sink, that's the behavior, the impact. I feel you don't respect me and expect me to do all the work. So you start with a behavior, and then you go to the impact. And when you talk about the impact, feel free to talk about all the assumptions, feelings, interpretations you have, because that is the impact. That is the impact. And this is really important because the other person understands that there's a cause and effect. They did something that caused something, whether it's good or bad. And then step 4 is the really important ending. Encourage effective future behavior. This is where we're looking to the future and the behavior we want to encourage. So if it was a positive behavior, something we want to see more of, when you come prepared to the client meeting, you make the team look good, keep it up. Or if it's a negative one, when you were late every day of this week, the team thinks you don't care about them. Could you change that? So when it's positive, really simple, say, thank you, please keep it up, do more of that. And when it's negative, could you change that? Can you do something different? When you have a bit more of a trust and connection with the other person, you can go to the advanced mode where you say, what can you do differently? How could that be better? You involve them in the future solution. And like I said, it's also, framework is good outside of work. When you leave dirty dishes in the sink, I feel you don't respect me and expect me to do all the work. What can you do differently? Like any framework, getting this right and feeling comfortable using it requires practice. So if you haven't gone through this with a real scenario in mind, or you have other scenarios you didn't think of, I recommend you rewatch this and really write down the feedback you would give. You can even role play with someone to build that confidence, or you can, talk to a mentor, talk to a friend, talk to a colleague. Just practice that. And that is really, really important. Before we go to get some questions and answers, I'd love to see if there's anyone who wants to share some of the. I'd love to hear about, again, completely voluntary, but is there anyone who would love to share that incident from the past and kind of like talk through the feedback they would have given that person?
I'm happy to jump in.
Oh, yeah. Is it Sam?
It's Sam, yeah.
Hello,
Thanks,
Sam.
Guy. This is a great presentation. I was working with a director of engineering who is very intelligent, and our communication styles were very different. I can say that now because we've worked together quite a bit and figured things out. But at the time, in meetings with this engineering director, a lot of times he would talk over me and interrupt, and I really didn't know how to handle that because I hadn't interacted with that before, and I immediately got upset and felt like he was doing it on purpose, and I felt my blood start to boil, and I just got upset, and I even attempted pulling him aside, and I got the first step right. I said, can I offer you feedback? And he said yes. And then I proceeded to just tell him everything that he was doing wrong. So I got the first step right, and the last few steps completely wrong, which didn't turn out well. It ended up in an argument, which we kind of just decided to leave on the table and never went back to. But yeah, so that's kind of my experience of how I started and had to learn from that experience and working with other people and learning this technique. I'm still not great at it, but it's nice to get some tips and tricks on how to make it better.
So let's try this out if you're willing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's imagine I'm this person.
Okay.
How would you give me that feedback now that you have a bit more of a understanding of the framework?
That's great. So I again would start saying, hey, do you mind if I offer you some feedback based on the meeting that we were just in?
Oh, sure.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to call out, when we're in the meeting and you interrupt when I'm speaking, it really makes me feel like my opinion isn't valued.
So let's pause for a second. You did steps
Yes.
2 and 3, right? When you
Yeah.
interrupt me, that's great. That's observable behavior. That's something that happened. And then step 3, the impact. What was the impact again?
Makes me feel like my opinion is not valued.
Wonderful.
Devalued.
Yeah. Notice that you talked about the behavior and then you talked about the impact, and that is great. A lot of times when feedback is not structured well, we go straight to step 3. We go straight to, hey, you made me feel terrible in this meeting. Hey, you don't value my my opinion. And the other person, what made you like think that? Because they have no idea what behavior they had that caused you to think that. But by starting with the observed behavior, they understand the connection you made. And then step 4.
So step 4 is when you ask them, could you change? So I guess you could say, could you change that? But I'd like to go into the advanced level because I like a good challenge.
Sure.
So if we go into that and say, how can we work together going forward in a different way that helps us communicate better together?
That's
I don't
awesome.
know about that one.
You can really
Okay.
simplify that. You can say,
Yeah, it's a lot of words.
you can even say, please don't do it again.
Okay.
That's fine. That's okay. Please don't do it again. Don't interrupt me again.
Yeah,
Or you can
yeah.
say, how might, the old designery talk of how might we find ways to work better together, or to communicate better together.
Mhm.
Both are
Mhm.
fine. Both are valid. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Do we have another volunteer who would like to practice this? It's okay if not. That's fine. Awesome. So this is the talk now. We're actually going to open it up to questions.